listening to the Massage Therapist Development Initiative. I'm Jamie Johnston.
And I am Eric Purvis. This is a podcast by massage therapists for massage therapists.
Our objective is to simplify how to be a more evidence-informed practitioner. Let's dig into this episode. There are times when your beliefs get challenged, and there are times that you have to change the way that you do things. We've been seeing lots online lately with people that are going back and forth between what the NOI group is saying and what other research papers are saying. And so we decided we would dig into some of this because, as science should, we should always challenge our bias. So with that, we will look into a couple of papers that are both from Quittner and Wiseman. One called Pain Medicine and Its Models, Hindering or Helping. And then the other one, sorry, just bringing the title up, is Pain is Not a Thing and How That Error Affects Language and Logic in Pain Medicine. So jumping into it, sorry, I'm going back and forth between notes here.
No, that's okay.
I think the biggest thing that I take from this is words matter, which we believed anyway.
Yes, and I agree that this, I've been reading some of these guys' papers, and I've been reading some of their blogs for a while now, just because it provides a different thing than the normal echo chambers that we get stuck in. But it seems to me that, it took me a while to really understand what the heck they were talking about, because it just seemed that they were just kind of basically critiquing everything that was quite common language or quite common beliefs or ideas or ways of practicing in pain care. And then so I was like, well, what are you guys saying? And I think a lot of it comes down to is the words that are being used and how things are being described, as well as it seems to be that the things that this group and these researchers are arguing against is, I think they're arguing against how often kind of biopsychosocial models are used in practice, but I don't see it necessarily as a problem in the, I don't really use it. I prefer framework. They're not really as, I don't think it's a problem with the framework itself as much as it is how it's often communicated to people in pain in practice. That's where I see the splitting hairs kind of thing.
I wonder too, because I looked at, as I was reading through it, I was there were some of the challenges that they were making, which is great because we should challenge things. But I was reading it and going, well, who's saying that? Because some of the things I'm like, those aren't the things that I would say to a patient, or that's not the way that I look at it. So the part of me was wondering, who exactly are you challenging? Because there's some of the things for sure that are, for lack of a better term, splitting hairs. But I'm not sure who it is that's communicating to patients in the way that they mention in some of these things.
Right. Yeah, the thing that the takeaways I get from reading not just these papers, but some of the other stuff from them, a colleague Monica sent me probably a couple dozen papers that they had sent her, and then she forwarded them to me, and I've read not all of them, but I've read through majority of them. And I mean, NOI group and kind of Mosley in that group, who uses a specific language to communicate the complexity of pain. Like they talk about pain being this protective response, and pain can be a learned thing, and I see the argument from this group here about how that can be problematic. But what I do see from what NOI has done and Mosley in their research is they seem to have taken this really complex neurophysiology and this human experience of pain, and they've tried to make it something more simplistic for clinicians to think or reason or use in practice. And so it shifted that movement away from this pathoanatomical tissue structural problem explanation more towards your systemic sensitivity, and there's like brain and peripheral and spinal cord stuff happening. That's like the NOI thing, right? And then they try and put it in a way that's teachable and can be used in practice. And I think there is probably some oversimplifications of the words that they use. And I like what you say, like I agree with what you say there, Jamie, is I think it seems that your average clinician out there, if they are saying those words to people, that could be a problem. Oh, you've just learned your pain. Oh, you're just stressed out. You start blaming these psychosocial things and just trying to discount completely the bio. So I know these guys talk about the nociceptive apparatus and the nociceptive system, and there's always going to be an activation of that in every pain experience. And I don't think that anybody is necessarily really arguing too hard against that.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like they're saying, like, yeah, there's some type of activation in your system.
Yeah.
And then you have a conscious awareness of that. And there's other psychosocial stress, other things going on around you, which can influence that. Okay, I get that. But when when you're talking to patients, clients, whatever, like, are you trying to explain away their pain? Because I don't think that is what people are really doing anymore. And if they are, then I think it's a misinterpretation of like NOI's teachings.
Yeah. And I think like just when you touched on it there, like that's one thing that I switched the way that I explained it years ago, is that, the psychosocial things can influence your pain. It's not a causative thing. And I know in the one paper they talked about like the mind-body connection, and that they're like, well, my understanding of how I read it anyways is that it's not what we should be saying to patients. But yet they're also saying the biomedical model doesn't work either.
Yeah.
So I mean, in the one paper, they, you go through and they make some good points. Like, when I look at what they're saying for words matter, like one of the statements was, when core concepts employed within a field are open, there's potential for inaccurate or misleading uses of terms, which then can be amplified with the patient. And it talks about like pain, and it's saying a stimulus in and of itself is not painful. By contrast, it's the experience labeled pain that is painful.
Yeah.
Right. So it's what the person's going through is painful.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the stimulus. And then they break it down further with different objections and saying, that it's a noxious stimuli that causes the pain, that it's a stimulus that is damaging or threatens to damage normal tissues, which is the definition of a noxious stimuli that is capable of activating nociceptors.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone at Noi Group or others are saying that that's not true.
Yeah, and this is where it gets confusing, right? Because you're like, okay, so what's the argument? The argument is, I think, more about the they talk about the reification of pain, so pain being a thing, right? And I think that's this one paper. It's called "Pain is Not a Thing: How That Error Affects Language and Logic in Pain Medicine." Mm-hmm. Well, pain isn't a thing. I mean, pain is an experience. So pain isn't a tangible thing you can grab your hands on to. Yeah. But I fail to understand, and maybe I just need to think about this, reflect on this a bit more. Maybe I did just spend more time with this, but we use the term pain because that's an experience that people are aware. Like, we all know what pain is, but pain for each of us is different. Yeah. And is anyone saying that it's not, like, and there is lots of studies that show that, there's certain areas of the brain that are activated when someone's experiencing pain. And there's lots of studies that I've seen that look at like the transition from these kind of sensory nociceptive dominant areas of the brain in acute. And then as things transition to a more persistent, there's changes, those sensory areas go away. And there's now activation in the limbic system and other areas of the brain. And then what I get from this group here is that they're saying, well, you're saying that people are thinking differently about their pain, or the pain is an output of the brain, and they're saying that that's not true. And you think, well, I get that argument. Okay, it might not be true, but we do know that there is, if pain is a lived experience of somebody, then there's got to be something happening in the brain and in the mind of that person that could be sensitizing their overall system, whether that's a peripheral nociceptive or a central or cortical thing that's stimulating nociceptive activity. Does it change how we think? Does it change how we communicate? Is it changing anything that is it something new?
Mhm.
And I don't think that it really is changing anything too much, because a lot of the stuff that the kind of the last decade of pain information, there might be a little bit too much brain focus, but no one is saying that pain is not a lived experience of the person. I've never heard anybody be like, I've never encountered anybody like, oh, you're just thinking your pain, you're making your pain up, or your pain is an output of your brain.
Yeah, and I know that, and we've talked about it before, where I've been communicating with a person, and probably used the wrong language, where they went, so you're saying it's all in my head, and
Right.
had to backpedal and go, no, 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 no. So, they're making some very valid points, that the way we communicate with patients is very important, because we don't want people believing that it's all in their head, but the brain is still going to be involved in whatever that pain experience is that the person's going through. And going through, just looking at some of the stuff, they make the argument of the use of the suffix septive. They're saying that that's the property of a receptor, but is often tied to a stimulus. And this leads to an argument that a nociceptive stimulus is one that activates nociceptors. But that's what a noxious stimuli does. But that's not language that I would ever use with a patient.
No.
So, I mean, important for us to have that knowledge. And I think one of the big things that they're saying is, when we're looking at research papers, this is the language that should be used.
Yes.
And I can't disagree with them in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not ever a way that I would communicate with a patient.
Yeah. Well, and this goes to a lot of the stuff that we have in research and in our world of pain and rehab and movement and all that stuff, is that there's really cool information.
Yeah.
But how much of it is really clinically relevant? So based on, like, this is some of the stuff we talk about in our courses, and we teach, and, we communicate with others about it. But in terms of, like, how relevant is that to us clinically? Is this providing anything new? Not really. I mean, I would say maybe I am maybe a little bit more aware of being less brain centric, but still, you're still like neuroimmune centric with this information, because that information coming from the nociceptive activity is being received within the system, and then that awareness of that and meaning of that comes from the person and their experience.
Yeah.
So I it's good. I think it's good to get out of the echo chamber, and I think it's good to challenge stuff, but I still don't see, it hasn't changed how I would do a lot. No. But I want it to. Like, I would love to read this and be like, I'm open book. What do I do differently? What do I do better? What do I throw away? What do I adapt? Nah, very slight, very slight.
Yeah. And as we look through, like, because I made a whole bunch of notes on this, when they're talking about, like, pain sensitivity, insensitivity, hypersensitivity, and pain threshold, things like that, because we've all had those people on the table that are, I've got a high pain threshold, you can dig your elbow into me, and I like that. So one of the points that they made is the threshold the quality of the stimulus or the quality of the response? So if the person has a low threshold, which actually means the person's ability to tolerate the experience, they're saying we should use descriptions like pain-inducing stimulus and intensity, with more specific terms that refer to the type of stimulus, which would be like mechanical, thermal, or chemical. But again, that probably has less to do with us digging our elbow into them, more to do with how they're experiencing pain in the outside world, and what things are inducing pain for them or creating pain for them.
Yeah. And this goes to what we talk about all the time is there's not a right or wrong. Like, if a person has a high or low or insensitive to touch, what's the right touch for that person, as us as massage and manual therapists? Well, the one that the person likes, the one that they can tolerate. So does it matter what their level of sensitivity is, or is it maybe just just as a clinician, if you understand that there's these different sensitivities and everyone's going to respond differently, and there's a world around this person, there's a person's experience that might be sensitizing their system, then all we need to really understand from this is that, yeah, you always are adapting your touch or your treatments or your interventions and strategies to what fits best with that person on that day, which is to help the person have a better lived experience.
Yeah. And it always yeah, like you said, it comes back to their experience. So whether the painful experience that they're having when they're not with you, that's their experience, and the experience they're having while they're on the table with you is their experience. So that's where that communication aspect comes in of, does this feel good to you? Is this a good experience for you? Those kind of things when we're doing manual therapy with somebody, always comes back to that patient-centered care.
Yeah.
What experience is important to them? What is a valued experience to them? What is a meaningful experience for that person on the table?
Yeah. Easy.
um, it's interesting though, because some of the things that we've talked about so many times, like pain catastrophizing, they make the point that is catastrophizing a part of the pain experience or a reflection upon the experience, and is this purpose to serve the experiencer or the observer? So if we're talking, if we think as the observer that somebody is catastrophizing, is that more important to us or is it more important to the person?
It's always more important to a person.
Yeah, but it's something that we should try to take into account. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to look at them and be like, you're catastrophizing right now.
No.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a really, I mean, that's a really important distinction, because we like that kind of moves, like we want to move away from that operator perspective where we're putting our judgment or beliefs onto the person.
Yeah.
Which would be, so if we said, oh, you're catastrophizing, that's us putting judgment onto the person. But it can provide us insight into thinking, well, yeah, so say you're doing the pain catastrophizing scale and it says they have a high score on that. How is that going to, that is actually could be useful information for us, because it lets us know as a clinician, this person is suffering from their pain and how they feel about the pain, how they're experiencing their pain. But it doesn't tell us what their level of pain is. It just tells us how it's impacting them. So I don't, again, I don't see how that really, unless you told somebody you're catastrophizing.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't.
Which could have a massive impact on somebody.
Yeah, then it's just, we have to be mindful of using our words for sure.
Yeah. Which leads us into also the comments that they make on kinesiophobia or fear avoidance. They kind of make the same point, that is that a judgment of the observer or judgment of the person who's experiencing it. Just reading here it says it doesn't deny the importance and challenge of interpreting the behavior of a person experiencing pain. So they suggest that we explore the person's cognitive appraisal of their own predicament in their words. So listen to them, and whatever they tell you is what they're going through.
Yes.
So it comes back to that patient-centered care again.
Yeah. And that's what we've learned that before from, having interviews with people like Keith Meldrum. Yeah. Who it's, talking about the lived experience. They talk about every year at San Diego Pain Summit, they always have the or they almost, not always, but many years they have that panel of, and they tell people their lived experience. And that's always emphasized as being the most important thing. Like, you can know all your stuff about pain. You can know all your treatments and all the things to say and do and not do. But what matters most is really trying to be in that safe space for that person, for their lived experience, and not taking that away from them, or not trying to replace that with your own views.
Yeah. So I like how they put some of those things in there, that, is it the role of the observer or the role of the person who's going through it? And there's definitely going to be some instances where it's our responsibility as the observer to recognize that something might be going on, but it also doesn't mean that we have to communicate that specifically to the person in front of us.
Yeah, not unless we get their permission, not unless they want to know, which is person-centered again. Yeah.
So I find all this very interesting, because I've seen these big debates and arguments online. And the people make some great points in these papers, but I think in the long run, we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah. And it is, I know in this pain medicine and its models paper, which is a bit old now. I think it's 2010 or 8 or something. It's a while ago. It's really an argument against kind of the linear process of biopsychosocialism.
Mhm.
Right. And that is true that, in the biopsychosocial, when you first encounter it as a clinician, you're often looking to be like, is this bio, is this psycho, is this social? And you're looking to explain pain via one of those domains.
Mhm.
And it becomes, and so they're like, oh no, the biopsychosocial is more inclusive. Whereas, traditional biomedical, like the Descartes Cartesian model, was very linear. So that how it's explained, and biomedicine is very linear, but biopsychosocial is just as linear. You're just looking to find something new to blame. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's how some people are applying it, but that's not how, I don't think how it's supposed to be applied. I've never understood it to be applied that way. It's more like holistic, like whole with a W, like looking at the overall person, their experience, and how is the world and the person, how is everything around this person shaping their experience. That's how I see biopsychosocial. I don't see it as this linear process, but maybe how it's taught or maybe how the people understand it is different. And maybe, if I think back to my early days, maybe I thought it was different too, but I don't know, it's hard to remember what you used to think.
I don't remember what I thought yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. Where am I?
Yeah. However, and I think we can go off on a little bit of a discussion about this as well, is at the end of one of the papers, there's a statement that they made that I absolutely loved, because I think it's applicable to so many more things in our profession than just this one topic. They said, one of the more powerful therapeutic tools available to the clinical pain practitioner, irrespective of their background discipline, is to present a clear and honest explanation that is as close to accurate as possible in the current state of knowledge.
Ooh, yeah.
I think that is beautiful. And I think that we have to take that and almost apply it, for lack of a better term, globally to what we do. And for those that are out there saying, I don't need to look at research because I know what I do works, ones that are still using old narratives of how their technique works, this right there, if that doesn't tell you that you need to change, I don't know what else could, because we have a responsibility as healthcare practitioners to give as honest an explanation of what's going on with the person in front of us as we can, with the most updated current state of knowledge.
100%. And we have an ethical obligation to do that as healthcare providers, right? We should have, as you learn new information, even if you look at our competency documents and stuff that they have here in BC, you're supposed to use research and incorporate it into your practice regularly. And as you learn, you're supposed to be able to adapt your knowledge based on your current adapt your practice based on your current knowledge. And as we learn more, if we learn stuff that contradicts or challenges what we used to know or what we used to do, then we have to change. We have an ethical obligation to change, and people who come to seek our care deserve that.
And which is the exact reason why we wanted to discuss these two papers.
Yeah.
Is in the hopes that it would either challenge or make us change. And it probably has to a degree, but probably not to the degree that I thought it was going to.
Yeah, and I think so too. I agree with that as well. Like, I was trying to really, when reading through these things before, really trying to challenge my biases.
Yeah.
But as I read through this, I'm thinking, no, that's kind of what we already say and what we already do. And it's good to question the stuff. Obviously, like we said before, it's good to not just sit in an echo chamber. But the one issue I have with these guys' writings is that they don't really give you any further information about, like, here's things moving forward.
Here's how you can fix that.
Yeah, it's very philosophical and very like, well, this other way is not right. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see them come up with like an idea or like a knowledge translation plan or something moving forward that says this is how this information could change your practice or could be applied to your practice. I would love to see that, because when it's just challenging and saying like this is wrong, blah 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 blah, but without what do you replace it with? Then it becomes harder to incorporate into your practice. And I think the message is going to get lost. I think that's why in like the, our CE world that we live in, is that when you're teaching stuff, you have to find something else to replace it with. And I know early in my career, trying to just give people information, hoping they would change, they don't change. You need to try and give them some information and be like, and this is how we try and use this in practice. This is how it shapes what we say and what we do and how we think. But with the absence of like, what do we do with this information? I think it gets lost on a lot of people. I think that's part of the problem, at least from my anecdotal observations of this, how this stuff works on social media when people are arguing about it.
Yeah.
It's like, yes. So what are you telling me then?
Yeah, I agree. But I would say one thing, looking at it, is my impression was that they were saying this is how, like, these are the terms that should be used in research. These are the terms that should be used in papers. So perhaps if that's the approach, is if they're saying, well, from now on, when a research paper is done, this is the term that should be used, then gradually that would start to change perhaps how we're communicating with a patient or with a person in front of us.
Yeah.
But that was just my impression of what they were trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's I think that's a really valid point, because I think one of our first podcasts we did was about like words and the power of beliefs and stuff. So yeah, if there's better ways of kind of communicating the similar ideas or similar or same things, then of course let's change it, and that will become the new normal.
Yeah. But I still don't think it would change how I communicate with the person in front of me, because I would never look at a person and use words like noxious stimuli and those kind of things.
No.
Unless, like you said before, unless they asked and wanted to get really educated on this stuff. But I see the value of using it properly in research.
Yeah. And maybe that's where this stuff will be beneficial moving forward, is maybe there will be some changes in how the researchers are doing the things. Yeah. Rather than clinicians. And I mean, we look at all this stuff through a clinician's lens, not through a researcher lens. Yeah. I mean, these guys are, Quintner and Cohen are retired, and Asaf I think he works at a university in Israel somewhere.
That's right. He's Israel. I think Quintner is Australia.
Yes, I think Cohen is too. But anyway, yeah. So there's, but it's interesting, because I would like, we get so caught up in the details about like these like minutia of the neurophysiology and the language and stuff. But I'm gonna be very bold. I'm gonna say, if you took this information to a psychologist who treats people in pain, they're gonna be like, yeah, who cares? It's always about the lived experience. It doesn't matter about this other stuff. Yeah,
if you were talking to like a Melanie Noel,
yeah,
you would probably look at this and they go, okay.
Yeah, they're like, they're going to say, well, why are people arguing with this? Like, does it matter? Like, what matters most is the person's experience, and how can we help shape that experience? And they're obviously through the psychological interventions or ways, this. So I think this stuff here is very, very. There's a lot of people out there that treat people, that help people that hurt. Yeah. But this information, I would say, would be specific to maybe more physiotherapy or medicine. But I would say a lot of these guys' criticism, a lot of it comes towards the physiotherapy professions, because that is kind of, a lot is directed towards NOI and Mosley's stuff and Butler's stuff. So psychologists and other people are like, who cares?
Yeah. Well, we do, because then that's why we looked at the papers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's
yeah. So I think we can look at the overall message of this specific podcast, is that we can come to agreement that it's the person's experience that's going to be the most important thing for us to take into account. And just communicate well with your patients. And there are certain times where we need to be the observer and just listen to what it is they're saying to us.
Yeah. Which is good quality person-centered care. Yeah. And we don't need to impart our beliefs onto people without their permission or without their wanting to.
Yeah. Unless they ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and of course, the other thing is to always be open to challenging your bias and looking at new things and seeing how you can improve as a therapist.
Brilliant.
Perfect. That one actually went a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. Because it took me a long time to go through those papers, but yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. And thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. These kind of topics are what we are all about. If you'd like to learn more, go to our websites,
themtdc.com or ericpurvis.com. If you know of any other therapists that could benefit from this, please tell them to subscribe.